Why do we help others? Social psychologists have identified a number of possible reasons why humans help one another. These reasons can be divided into two categories. First, evolutionary perspectives. This includes kin selection, reciprocal altruism, and empathy. Second, motivational perspectives, like obtaining rewards and minimizing costs, feeling good, and appearing good to others. Let's cover each of these in more detail on the next slides. We'll start with the evolution-based explanations for helping. One reason we help is because it enables our survival. Social psychologists have found evidence that we prefer to help our genetic relatives over strangers and close non-relatives, a phenomenon they call kin selection. From an evolutionary perspective, this tendency increases the likelihood that our relatives, and thus our genes, will survive. It's strongest when the stakes are high and the situation is dangerous, like when trying to save your community from a hungry lion or pack of wolves years ago. In modern times, like when deciding who to save from a house fire or car accident. A second evolution-based explanation is reciprocal altruism. That is, we help others because we know it will increase the likelihood that they help us at some time in the future. Many parents raise their children with the expectation that they'll return the favor later in life and care for them as they age. Again, this tendency increases the likelihood that our relatives survive and reproduce. And it's not restricted to basic needs. Not only do we share shelter, food, and sometimes clothing in reciprocal ways, we also share money, usernames and passwords, intellectual property, advice, and transportation with the people in our lives. So why do we help people to whom we aren't related or with whom we don't share a social group? One explanation is the existence of empathy, the ability to understand and experience the emotions of others. From an evolutionary perspective, living in groups meant humans had to learn to recognize and respond to others' emotions. Noticing a group member is angry has survival value because it signals that we should avoid this person. Recognizing when someone else is sad signals that we should help this person. Without empathy, the group would be less cohesive, and members would experience more conflict. Empathy has two components. The cognitive component is perspective taking. This is using the power of imagination to see the world through someone else's eyes, trying to understand what it must be like to be in their shoes. And the emotional component is empathetic concern. This involves other-oriented feelings, like sympathy, compassion, and tenderness. Together, these two components allow us to think and feel what others think and feel, albeit in a less intense, and sometimes less accurate, way, which in turn helps us adapt to the environment and survive amongst other humans. Even infants show signs of empathy, suggesting it's a skill that starts to develop at a very early age. Shown here in the photo, the two babies on the right are showing empathy toward the crying baby on the left. The baby in the center reaches out with physical reassurance, while the baby on the right looks to the adults in the room for help. Now let's review the motivational factors that explain why we help. One is because it's rewarding. It makes us feel good about ourselves. According to the arousal cost-reward model, we react to emergency situations in the most cost-effective way to reduce the arousal of shock and alarm. When the rewards outweigh the costs, we're more likely to help. But when the costs are too high, we're less likely to help. There are a few exceptions to this tendency. You've probably heard stories about people running in front of moving vehicles and trains to save complete strangers. These stories illustrate what we call courageous resistance, when we help even in the face of potentially enormous costs. It's not extremely common, but it does happen every once in a while. In recent decades, some legislatures have stepped in to encourage citizens' pro-social behaviors. To reduce the costs of helping, for example, some states have Good Samaritan laws that provides some legal protection for bystanders who intervene to help. For example, the doctor who tries to save a life, but unfortunately fails. They can't be tried for murder in these instances. To increase the costs of not helping, some states have enacted duty to rescue laws, whereby people who create a hazardous situation are then obligated to help anyone that is in danger because of it. For example, an employer who witnesses an employee's injury has a duty to help them. A school principal whose students fall ill due to a gas leak is obligated to help them. Failure to intervene, then, is a liability in these situations. Another motivational explanation for helping is because it makes us feel better. There's a strong relationship between giving help and feeling better, both mentally and physically. For example, studies of brain activity suggest that cooperating with others on some basic tasks was intrinsically rewarding for participants. In other words, pro-social behavior activates the same area of the brain as material rewards like money. In addition, we sometimes experience empathetic joy, the pleasure we experience when we see someone else experiencing relief of some kind. So when we see the good our helping does, it makes us feel joyful. According to the negative state relief model, people help others to counteract their own feelings of sadness. That is, sometimes we help when we're feeling bad, because we know helping will make us feel better. And finally, we help because we think it's the right thing to do. That is, our motivation is guided by social norms, by our moral code, by an expectation that we should help when we see that others need it. Leave no one behind is an example. We learn these social norms at a young age, and they vary across cultures. In smaller, rural towns, helping is encouraged. In larger, more urban cities, however, minding your business is the norm. We'll take a close look at some of these cultural differences later in this lecture. Next, we're going to consider the difference between selfish and selfless motives.